Often it's launch day that's when a game actually hits its peak concurrence. That is not seemingly the case for Baldur's Gate 3, because after I published our video, it kept going. Now the peak player number is 814,000, and that does mean that it's firmly entered the record books. It has displaced Apex Legends, a free-to-play game. It has also hit stream game Goose Goose Duck as well. So now it is the 8th highest concurrent player number game ever on Steam. And rather hilariously, he had told his IT department to prepare for 100,000 people playing the game over the weekend. Well, that did not happen, but I'll tell you what is happening, and it's pretty awesome. It's our sponsor, Boot.dev. I mean, hell, their founders are viewers of the channel, and code Bellular News gets you 25% off. Now, Boot.dev, right, is a programming RPG that makes learning back-end development fun. I mean, it's got XP, quests, levels, achievements, a global leaderboard, even leaderboards by week so you can, compete with other users. Now, back-end developers in the US have earned a median salary of $100,000 in 2022. It sounds pretty awesome. This is a role that often allows as well for remote or hybrid work, which could really fit your lifestyle. So Boot.dev specializes in back-end development using Python and Go, right? And doing that at your own pace. I think Python and Go are absolutely pretty much perfect skills. I love it. And their whole philosophy is to avoid tutorial hell, just bouncing around random things in YouTube, and instead to just start coding, to start shipping code. And that is exactly what their fantastic platform is geared towards. Just going through the various topics, I mean, look at the utter boatload of content that they have. It's starting off super approachable, and then it is going properly in depth. So bouncing around random YouTube tutorials, copy-pasting things from Stack Overflow that you don't exactly understand, that's not the way to do it. Here, it's all about shipping projects and focus. Boot is just fantastic, and as a computer science major, I can say that this is pretty much the ideal way to actually learn to code. Beats any semester of what school was giving me, that's for sure. And these are skills that could significantly increase your earning potential, or if you're like me, actually have some fun, because I've not programmed in ages. Right, you can do the same. Learn to code with 25% off using code Bellular News. Big thanks to their founders, Lane and Alan, for supporting us. GG, guys, and let's go. I mean, in a world where we're all thinking about our big, super, approachable, whatever, live service games that are free to play, get all the big numbers. No, it is a boomer game. It's translation of a board game for nerds. Yes, we're winning. Feels damn good. And before the launch, this is what their CEO had to say. There's degrees of how well the game has to do. This is him speaking about the performance, the sales. If it flops, well, that's going to be a difficult conversation than if it does okay, which is going to be a different conversation to if it does very or very, very good. But we do need some sales. If we don't have any, it'll be like what you would expect for a studio. We'll see. We're dependent on the market like any company is. And this is a market that has rewarded a lot of things. And I think what's interesting is that this is a sort of game that if it were made by a lot of the other larger AAA studios, that one could perhaps say have cinematic ambitions where everything has got to, Nathan Drake moving that rope around that tree's got to look perfect. There's a lot of overt gaminess and even a little bit of jank here and there of the systems just being very out there and in your face. Baldur's Gate 3 is not afraid of being a video game. It is not afraid of being a digital translation of a tabletop RPG, and still with that, it has produced some of the highest numbers we have ever seen in this industry. Now, staying with the computer RPG, there is an interesting touch point here. Here's another quote from their CEO. We've seen in the past other games that were very successful in early access, and then on the day of release, they didn't sell that much more because they were saturated already. It's the idea of yeah, early access already reached all of your players. He said that was his biggest fear. Now, this is something we've actually talked about with Pillars of Eternity 2, post-crowdfunding. Pillars 2 got its crowdfunding, but then very notably for Obsidian, they just didn't really have the follow-through. And eventually, it was Phil Spencer and his big old bag of cash that rescued them out of that hole. But ultimately then, this is what happens when you dramatically exceed expectations. You absolutely blow up past who you originally expected your game to find. I think that's what's happened here. And rather shockingly, even with those insane concurrents, it was a fairly smooth launch. Yes, there were problems with moving from early access over to the full version in regards to preloading the game. That kind of sucked. And there were bugs, even though for most people it was a very polished experience. But with just how big a game this is and how systemically intertwined it is, bugs are absolutely going to be a thing. And as an example here, they have actually pushed 2 patches to the game, nearly fixing 1,000 bugs. Yeah, that's how many. Absolutely mad. Now, as I move us into the body of this video, now that we understand the success here, I mean, I should just mention it's been very nice seeing many team members of Larian kind of getting to have their victory lap, right? This has been an absolutely incredible, probably career-defining moment for so many of them. But now the things we've got to talk about are essentially one of the core reasons why this game is so successful, the power of game systems, niching down in speciality, and then the microtransaction situation, because there is technically one fairly interesting microtransaction in this game, just it's one that 2.5 million people basically already have and maybe don't even know that they have, but beyond that, there are none. And going through those Steam reviews, you constantly see people talking about price point and business model. Okay, systems-driven success. How to actually pull off something as Herculean as this. When you take a team, tools, and effort from previous developments, and remember, they have been making role-playing games of a few different formats, but pretty much like this one for a very long time. When you take that and you use it to build something new with all of your skill and all of your tools, you can make something exceptional that truly resonates with your audience and generates proportionately excellent sales. And it's the sort of thing we could talk all day about games where a shift of mechanics or a change in team dynamics has resulted in a different experience, right? One that can't really bring the full weight of a prior success to bear. It's the whole thing of maybe you're the band, you're trying to do your follow-up album, you want to change your music a bit, and oh dear, there's maybe some faltering steps. But the thing with Larian here is everything has been aligned for them, but on top of that, they've had particular strengths. Number one, they were able to license a globally recognized brand in the form of D&D. Now, this is actually quite big for a number of reasons. D&D has exploded in the cultural consciousness. We've now got, as an example, Stranger Things. Fairly major thing, particularly massive, I know, at least in like American culture. We've got David Harbour running around killing a big thing with his big sword that you look at it, it's comically large, and then you remember, oh, it's a Dungeons & Dragons reference. D&D has been pretty much everywhere, not even having to mention the likes of Critical Role exploding onto the scene. And also Larian benefiting from the very handy thing of having a big studio movie set in Dungeons & Dragons happen just before this game came out. Of course, they're able to quite naturally piggyback off that general brand awareness and marketing. That's all really strong. Then they were able to risk early access, right? And that meant they were able to make the most of their development time. Now, I don't have the exact numbers, but I believe moving from early access to full release was pretty much them putting like 2/3 of the game in. Like, it was a pretty enormous amount of content. So that'll mean that even for the people who have been playing through early access, launch day still felt like launch day. So remember, their CEO was worried about that kind of thing, worried about early access cannibalizing their launch. I think that's because a lot of games, they blow up into early access and then they crawl towards launch, and launch is a milestone, whereas here launch was truly a very, very massive content release as well. Now, what's also interesting is this broad genre. We've got Owlcat Games, of course, working on Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous, as well as the upcoming Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. These are both TTRPG adaptations into modern CRPGs, right? And in both cases, these are games that also launched with early access periods where players were gradually given additional content while the team got very real feedback about the game and the systems. As they build more, they test more, the game becomes more stable, the audience gets a better experience, word of mouth grows. Here's a really good example. Our game, The Pale Beyond, whenever that was coming out, like, we did a lot of testing beforehand. And just whenever you have like 20,000 people playing your game in like a week or two or whatever it ends up being, you just learn so much more. You get to fix so many bugs. Now imagine that happens during early access, where you're not going to be heavily punished for that in your review score. So that by the time you flip it over to launch and have a humongous content release, you can pretty much guarantee, I won't say a bug-free experience. I've had one or two hilarious cinematics where characters have just been talking while they're floating in midair, but, you know, I don't really mind too much. But still, for a game like this, which is an absolute worst nightmare for bugs, it is crazy just how polished the experience has ended up being. Now, it's of course not something unique to CRPGs, the idea of doing your early access period that well, you know? We've seen Sons of the Forest do that quite well, BattleBit Remastered, Starship Troopers Extermination, of course, Dave the Diver, another fairly large success here. And the thing that binds all these games together is they had development that comes directly out of the work that the studios had performed previously, as well as successfully banked audiences and resources to spend on development. I think this is absolutely the big lesson here. These are all developers who have kind of, I don't want to say they're staying in their lane, that almost seems a bit rude, but a really good example, a game that I adore is Battlestar Galactica Deadlock, right? And it is definitely a small-scoped game, but it gave me that slice of the Galactica universe that I'd wanted. And the thing is, it was really an adaptation of the developer's previous game, but it turned out all that expertise meant that they could really nail it with Battlestar Galactica Deadlock. This, you know, moving from Divinity Original Sin 2 over to Baldur's Gate 3, it is just that, absolutely wrote large. The important thing here is that all of these games that I'm talking about are ones that have to be finely battle-tested because they are heavily reliant on system-based interactions and rule sets. If you're building your game on a lot of systemic interactions and you have your own tool set that supports all of that, then you're actually looking at the sort of game that can, I don't want to say scale infinitely with your budget. That's like a bit of a crazy thing to say, but you do get a form of very highly scalable game. And I'll shoot an example at you. This is one I used earlier in the office, right? So, you know, you're playing, say, a Naughty Dog game. I'll just use Nathan Drake and his rope, or Ellie and the hose, right? And you're maybe wrapping the hose around a tree or the winch or whatever it is. And the level of detail and perfectionism that's went into that's absolutely crazy. Now, what that means for them is if they want to do something, it has to reach that quality bar. Whereas in a game like this, because it is so driven by systems and player imagination, you think about what you want your player character to be able to do, you're able to pretty much go for, I don't want to say the bare minimum in terms of animations, but the fact that it's all systematized in the way that it is, especially if you're getting to use like your dice rolls and stuff, it just allows you to make a lot more content and to deliver on way more elements within the gameplay fantasy. I would essentially say that by really leaning so heavily on being a D&D adaptation, they're able to get like a lot of elements of the immersive sim into this setting. I think that's what people are finding to be particularly joyous in how the game actually lets them express their creativity through the actions of their party. Now, the thing is that in early access, Larian gave people access to Act 1 of the game. I'm sure you've seen the tweets. People are like, I'm 56 hours in and I've just got to Act 1. Pretty crazy. That's what a game like this actually enables. That's dozens of hours of gameplay, but of course only a limited portion of the story. And that essentially means that the systems that the entire game would hang off, those get to be fully tested, while they're still able to do a lot of the narrative and the content somewhat in secret. And that essentially means the combat, the conversations, the various different interactions, the things that are actually how you interact with the game, those get to be polished 100%. Even though they're only being expressed through, say, 30% of the game's content. And that is essentially a large part of why things have been so damn successful. And now, as somebody who's planning out the budget of a video game for the thing that we're doing next, I'm certainly thinking about, do I want to do an early access? And if so, how can I benefit from doing development like this, rather than early access immediately and then a crawl to a milestone, rather than early access and then a humongous explosive launch with an absolute ton of content. And so I think the core lesson is just gameplay, gameplay, gameplay. They were able to focus on that for so much during the, 2.5, 3 years of early access. And while that of course doesn't guarantee success, I think it does guarantee them the best shot that they can realistically do. And that's why it's worth going back to that quote from their CEO. Just making a good game that understands play is not necessarily enough, because as he said, we're dependent on the market like any company is. And even with all of those positive development factors that they had banked up, they're still a company, they still need to sell you a product, so what about the business model and how that is actually resonating with people? And this is at least one of the ways the game has been praised across the board. This is what's been memed everywhere across the internet. You probably saw it in the thumbnail of today's video. Are there any in-game purchases? No, there are no in-game purchases in our game. We believe in providing a complete and immersive gaming experience without the need for additional purchases. Enjoy the game to its fullest without any additional costs or microtransactions. That's what we want to hear. One purchase, no extra cost. It's all perfect, because I think what we're actually getting to is a sense where we just want to buy the game, and think we actually own it. Now, maybe that's not the case here, right? We own a license to the game on Steam or whatever it is, but fundamentally speaking, back in the day, you buy Morrowind, Morrowind is yours. There's nothing else to it. You buy whatever your shooter is, it's yours. There's nothing else to it. You pay for your World of Warcraft sub, you have the whole thing. The amount of nickel and diming that has went on over time, and if you want to see some nickel and diming in Activision Blizzard products, including World of Warcraft, oh, we've got a video coming for you. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps the day after. But we're all just so tired of that a game like this is so completely refreshing. Good example, I've been absolutely loving the brief amount of Overwatch 2 that I've played because I really enjoy how the game actually feels. I think the modes are fun, I like the characters, and I really like that Mythic Tracer skin. I think it's really cool. But because it's done in a FOMO Battle Pass, what initially was set up as, oh, I suppose I could grind my way through that and get that cool skin that I suppose I would like to have. Now, because a little bit of time has passed, because real life got in the way, and I think a stick of RAM in my computer died, so I had a bunch of blue screens, I've just abandoned the season. Because I now cannot realistically hit that goal. And that now means that the time that I did spend in Overwatch 2 feels wasted because it was framed in that goal that then outside circumstances got in the way of, me grinding for, which now means I can pretty much never get it without ponying up and spending a whole bunch of money on tier skips. This is the opposite of that experience, and that is why people are so excited. But the thing is, saying no microtransactions in a way, it still is marketing, and it is a sad thing that now we have to market games based on these things, these trappings of the modern industry that they do not have. That being said, there technically is some DLC in the form of the Digital Deluxe version. Now, just go over what it has. It has the Divinity Bard Song Pack, a PC or PS5 dice skin, Paintings from Revellion Collection, Adventurer's Pouch Collection, which is supplies and potions to get you started, a digital soundtrack for the game, digital art book, digital character sheets that go into depth for each character, and as well as just some, cosmetic things. So that's pretty much the situation there. I mean, even if you look at the reviews of the DLC, the reviews are all very positive, almost saying, hey, I'm happy to give you money. So, yeah, technically there is a DLC, but that's absolutely not to throw them in with Blizzard or whatever. This is not a case of nickel and diming. I mean, imagine a situation where you just got generic bland armor, but then, if you wanted armor that leaned into a particular aesthetic, that's then the cash shop, which is exactly what's going on in Diablo 4. So ultimately then, they're in a very strong position. Right now, it's out on PC. We believe the Mac version will be on the 6th of September, along with PS5, not 100% sure. Then, of course, PS5 will be in September. Now, that later date is quite interesting. They moved the launch of the game forward, so they're not competing with Starfield. I think that's undoubtedly a strong move. I mean, I'm sure more bugs could have been fixed in time for launch if they didn't do it like that, but I think they were fairly right in feeling confident. Now, on the topic of the PS5, Baldur's Gate is at the top of the PlayStation Store by sales, so yes, suffice to say then, I mean, it actually kind of makes sense. You think of something like this, it is more, it's almost in the name, CRPG, computer role-playing game. This is more of a thing on PC, right? So, actually splitting those launches up is probably going to build quite the little hype train for the PS5 players, which I think is kind of interesting. As for future content for the game then, it's been quite refreshing what they've said. There is nothing in the works. Now, there's a few interesting things there. The power cap of level 12 for D&D is to stop players from getting godlike powers that would be a nightmare to implement. But also it's because following up on the thousands of permutations of ending for Baldur's Gate 3 would be a very unsatisfying thing for players unless done well. That is extremely hard to do. And, of course, also, having worked in a game with many different endings, it's one of those things, as a player, it's very easy to see, oh, I could see what you could do next. But then, as the developer sitting there knowing every permutation of the ending of the game that you did, you're like, oh, this is going to cost all the money in the universe just to do a small amount of content, because beyond that ending, everything is so exponentially more expensive unless you perform some sort of, quasi-narrative reset conceit, such as, say, the Normandy getting lasered and Martin Sheen saving Commander Shepard in Mass Effect 2, which is their conceit to kind of reset you again. You'll note that's something that BioWare did in Mass Effect 2 and in Mass Effect 3. And even with that, they did have quite a few challenges actually representing all of the particular character relationships and things that a player would actually want. Now, as I've already said then, on the topic of DLC and that sort of thing, I've learned in the past you need to be careful announcing things before they're ready, because sometimes you have to cancel them because it just doesn't work out. We could work on an expansion and it could be boring, and we should stop working on it. And that's because if they continue in something that's boring, then they would have to sell it to people. Because, I mean, you spent all those millions of millions of dollars. You're kind of going to have to get something out of it anyway. And then we'd have to say, here's a boring thing, and we want you to buy it. That would not be cool. So we have the freedom to experiment and do our stuff, and when we're ready to announce it, we will. And that is a refreshing thing to hear. We have a complete experience, and they now have the freedom to follow up on that in whatever way they see fit. They certainly are going to have a large burn of cash. They have 450 employees. That being said, this seems to be an unbelievably outsized success. And especially because this is a self-published game. Look in Steam, developer Larian Studios, publisher Larian Studios. Now, what's kind of interesting here is there's a concept called cost of capital, right? And that is how much it costs for you to get the beans that you need to develop your game. They now are going to have a massive war chest of cash. But actually, here's the thing. You're not going to directly invest that cash. What having that very large war chest can actually do is decrease your cost of future capital, because you are now a less risky thing. You can perhaps get money at a better interest rate. Point here is this is such a big win for them, and it's self-published. It being self-published, and yes, there will be licensing fees with Wizards of the Coast. Of course, that'll be a thing. But if this was, say, a game that they published with Electronic Arts, say they're an independent studio, right? This would be nowhere near as good for them, because with a publisher, right? You know, let's just say you're taking a secured loan from a bank. Well, that's ultimately going to be like, all right, if you can't pay up, we're going to liquidate your assets. Then they liquidate your assets and you're sad. With a publisher, the game could fail. Their investment could go to zero, right? And that means, because they're taking on board that risk, the cost of capital for you as a studio going to a publisher, that's actually going to be really, really, really high. You know, you are going to be probably paying off the budget of your game a few times over to your publisher, right? Because of, you know, just how expensive that money will be, right? The terms of whatever the deal is. And you see, when you're getting into like AAA sized games that still are independently published, like, oh man, some of those deals are spooky. So the bit here that's really big then is basically, for me, it's about cost of capital, about how they just get to be an independent studio that can do whatever the fuck they want. That's the thing that makes it powerful. Look at CD Projekt Red. For them, it is the exact same thing. Now, I do think that they've had publishing agreements for some of their games, you know, on like different platforms and stuff, but I don't think that has actually involved development budget. And it will be that large chunk of capital needed for your development budget that, you know, is really going to make you have to go out there and take on money in a way that's pretty expensive. Whereas now they'll be able to raise cheap debt against their war chest, or even spend some of their war chest, I guess. It basically just means that everything that their CEO is saying about the sort of freedom they can now experience as a studio, it really is true. So much of that will be allowed for by a few things. Number one, they've been in likely a very good cash position, given that very strong performing 2.5 million copies sold early access period. With the game launch now being so successful, I mean, I'm sure they had excellent plans anyway. Now they truly do have a lot of freedom, and I think for me that's what's particularly exciting about them. So there you have it, Baldur's Gate 3. I think as it stands, go out there and enjoy. I'm only a few hours in because, oh man, it's hard to find time, and this is a big game. So hey, enjoy playing that over your weekend. I'll try to get a few hours in, and with that said, thanks for dropping by, and I'll see you tomorrow.